Morning. Morning, everybody. When Bob Hathaway told me he wanted to release the Pakistan report this week, I said, hey, Bob, why don't you make sure that people are thinking about Pakistan? And so I guess it's not a joke, but I mean, my point is I think people are thinking of nothing but Pakistan at the moment. And I want to commend our authors, our enlightened audience, and our astute director of our Asia program for all the work they do on Pakistan. I'm Jane Harmon. I'm the fairly new, I'm actually fairly old, but I'm the quite new president and CEO of the Wilson Center. I succeeded Lee Hamilton last March, and we are meeting today in the midst of yet another crisis in our tortured relations with Pakistan. Last weekend's deaths of 24 Pakistani soldiers, I'm sure we all agree, were a tragedy, and senior American and NATO officials have expressed our deep condolences to the families of the victims. The facts surrounding the airstrikes are still being sorted out, and they need to be, and NATO is rightly investigating. We are not here this morning to rush to conclusions either as to the circumstances behind the strikes or about who is at fault, but we did not need last weekend's events to remind us that our relationship with Pakistan is complicated and very difficult, and one that, at least according to me, and I know all of us up here, needs to be sorted out. Writing Pakistan out of the foreign policy script is not an option. Pakistan will soon have the fifth largest population in the world. It already has the seventh largest army. It is close to overtaking the United Kingdom as the fifth largest nuclear power. And by the way, I think many of you read a very disturbing article by Jeff Goldberg in the Atlantic magazine recently called Ally from Hell, on the subject of on the dreaded possibility, which I hope is not true, of loose nukes in Pakistan. The country's geographic location, demographic heft, military might, nuclear weapons capability, and linkages to violent Islamist terrorists ensure that it will remain central to American interests even after NATO forces depart Afghanistan. 2 years ago, when I was a member of the House of Representatives, Congress adopted the Kerry Lugar-Berman KLB Act, committing the United States to provide $1.5 billion in economic assistance to Pakistan in each of the next 5 years. I voted for KLB and thought and think it was the right thing to do. In passing KLB, Congress made a calculated bet that by investing in Pakistan's political and economic development, the U.S. could play a small but meaningful role in the creation of a prosperous, tolerant, and inclusive nation that would be a force for peace and stability throughout South Asia. Now, 2 years later, the United States is still struggling to fashion an effective program of civilian aid to Pakistan. KLB is under fire in both countries, and many are calling for Congress to add conditions to KLB aid, to cut back the amount of the aid, or to end the program altogether. Last weekend's events in Pakistan and the angry Pakistani response have clearly added to the pressures on the KLB program. Reflecting the widespread concern in both countries that KLB was in trouble, the Woodrow Wilson Center earlier this year organized a working group to take another look at it and to determine whether changed circumstances since congressional passage of KLB warranted reducing U.S. assistance, and to come up with a package of recommendations to make KLB a more effective tool of American policy. We are here today to release the report. In some respects, we could not have chosen a more inauspicious occasion for the release. But this newest controversy between the two countries also serves to underscore several of the principal arguments this report makes. One, that regardless of our many disagreements with Pakistan, a robust program of civilian assistance to that country serves important U.S. interests. And two, we should work to isolate U.S. civilian aid from our security-related differences with Pakistan, rather than single out the Pakistani people as those who will bear the brunt of our differences on security with Pakistan. Some of the recommendations of this report are controversial. Not everyone in or out of government in Pakistan or the United States will agree with all its judgments or its recommendations. But I believe that everyone will recognize this as perhaps the most searching, most comprehensive study of KLB ever undertaken. I commend the 17 members of the working group who spent the better part of a year on this effort, a number of whom are with us today. And with those who were part of the 17-member group who were not on the panel, please raise your hands so we can all see you. Oh, you're all in the front row. Thank you very much. I can see you, and thank you very much. You'll shortly be hearing from a number of the members, but first I want to recognize Dr. Jonah Blank. Jonah needs no introduction to this audience. There he is. He is widely recognized as one of the principal authors of the KLB legislation, acting in his capacity as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff and senior aide to then Senator Biden, and currently now senior aide to Senator Kerry, those being the former and current chairs of the Foreign Relations Committee. Welcome back to the Center, Jonah. We're looking forward to what you have to say, and we're hopeful, all of us at the Wilson Center are hopeful that not only will these recommendations be widely accepted out and about, but that they will persuade Congress, at least I would hope so, to continue this program and fully fund civilian aid to Pakistan. And let me just close with this. I have spent a lot of time in Pakistan. The district I represented in Southern California had a huge Pakistani-American population. I was in meetings about our civilian aid to Pakistan with then Ambassador Ann Patterson, and there's no question that we could do it better, but there's also no question that we must do it if we want to maintain, and we should, an appropriate and important relationship with that country. So please welcome Jonah, and thank you again, Bob, for your leadership on these issues and so many others at the Wilson Center.
Would you like me to start off?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. Is that, yeah, that's on. Okay. Well, first off, thank you very much, Congresswoman Harman, for that generous and undeserved introduction. Thank you, Bob, for setting this up and for convening this panel. And thank you, Polly, and all the rest of the members of the panel for the work that you've done. Let me give 3 brief disclaimers or apologies. The first apology is for my voice. As you may have noticed, I've got a bit of laryngitis, so my apologies if any of you have difficulty hearing me. Just shout out if you can't, and I'll try a little harder. Second disclaimer is I'm speaking here in my private capacity to provide a worm's eye view as a staff member who has seen this process through from the beginnings to the end. I am not speaking on behalf of Chairman Kerry or of Vice President Biden or of anyone else. It was, of course, the members who determined this process, and Congresswoman Harman's leadership in getting this through in the House was one I personally am very appreciative of, but I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone other than myself. Third disclaimer is that even in my private capacity, the fact that I'm sitting up on the panel should not be interpreted as endorsement or rejection of the report. I very much applaud the Wilson Center for its work, but I take no position on the actual content of the report. With that preliminary throat clearing out of the way, let me say a few words about why KLB arose, about the need that we thought it would fill, and the rationale for its continuation. First off, when this idea had its genesis, was 2004, 2005, many people, including then Chairman Biden, were dissatisfied with the state of U.S.-Pakistan relations. And many of us in the policy world were wondering how we break out of a dysfunctional relationship and make the relationship more functional. To go into the Wayback Machine, things at that time were looking perhaps as bad as they are now. One can judge it any way one wishes, which was a worse period. But let's remember, in 2004, 2005, 2006, this was the aftermath of the A.Q. Khan scandal, where it was publicly revealed for the first time the full extent of Pakistan's involvement in nuclear proliferation. Many of us who had access to intel were aware of pieces of this, but the general public, I think, was not really aware of what eventually became known as the nuclear Walmart. This caused a great deal of justifiable anger in Congress and a great deal of fear on the part of policymakers, because we weren't talking then about exchanges across the border or about various irritants that are going on right now. We were talking about the very real possibility of Al-Qaeda or of rogue nations or of other bad actors actually getting their hands on a deliverable nuclear capability. So that was a very scary prospect. In the counterterrorism field, we were just starting to realize how difficult it was going to be to capture or decapitate Al-Qaeda leadership. When in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, I wrote a memo for Chairman Biden predicting that we would kill or capture Osama bin Laden in a matter of weeks, months, and just to cover my behind, I said, it may even be a year. I really thought that was the outer limit of how long it would take. And here we were several years beyond that with no leads, and I should note, no drone program. Whether you love it or hate it, we did not have that tool in our toolbox back then. We had seen President Musharraf launch a series of military actions against the Taliban, both the Afghan Taliban and what would come to be called the Pakistani Taliban, without achieving anything. We were starting to understand and accept that the Quetta Shura was actually truly being given sanctuary in Quetta. And Musharraf himself was looking very shaky as a partner. He was in the process of being rejected by his own people, and yet there was no obvious transition in place to a more secure future for Pakistan. So in short, the policy that we had been pursuing of shoveling military aid at Pakistan was not yielding results, and nobody knew what else to do. It was out of that we developed this idea. And at least for me, the spark was the Kashmir earthquake of 2005. When I saw U.S. servicemen and women delivering aid in Chinooks and was privileged to fly along with on these Chinook flights and see what was actually happening, I saw that here we had a powerful tool. It was not impossible for us to change the relationship. The fact of seeing America as a friend in real concrete terms had a real impact in Pakistan. If you go just by poll numbers, we went from something like 13% to 40% approval rating virtually overnight. We were more popular with the Pakistani people, not only than Al-Qaeda, not only than the Taliban, but we were more popular than President Musharraf or his civilian opposition as well. So I got to thinking, what if we could have this same dynamic without a natural disaster? What if we could show the Pakistani people, not with rhetoric, but with real concrete deliverables, that we truly wanted to have a long-term, lasting, durable friendship? And I tried and tried and tried to think of some way of doing this without more money, because as anyone who has dealt with Congress knows, if you go to elected members and say, I've got a great idea, I want to take $1 billion more a year than we're spending now, 1.5 billion, in fact, and I want to take it out of your constituents' pocket and send it to people who don't like us very much. That's not an easy sell. So it took a long time for members of the policymaking community, since this was really an effort that was bipartisan, bicameral, and stretching way beyond Congress and way beyond administrations to build a critical mass of support for the central premise, which was this. We're not trying to buy the affections of the Pakistani people. We're not trying to give 1.5 billion a year as birthday cake and hope people will love us. What we are trying to do is change the debate, change the terms of the discussion. There's so much distrust and so much toxicity in the relationship that mere rhetoric cannot get it by. We'd have to do something big and drastic and real to make the statement that you don't have to listen to our words. Look at our actions. Look at what we were doing with the Chinooks. At a cost of $1 billion, we were actually taking action. We were saving the lives of Pakistanis, and they saw it. They knew it. They felt it. If we could do the same thing by bringing energy, by building roads, by building bridges, by building schools, helping the Pakistani people rebuild or build for the first time parts of their country that have been utterly ignored, then perhaps we'd benefit from a second look. Perhaps we'd be able to get over that hurdle of mistrust that had plagued the relationship. And amazingly enough, Congress agreed after a long series of debates on this. But the important thing is that the civilian piece of the aid would be unconditioned. That is, it would not have political conditions attached. There would be good governance conditions, metrics and benchmarks to make sure that the money wouldn't just get frittered away into private bank accounts. And that's something that both Pakistanis and Americans told me they needed. But political conditions would not be part of it. So that this wasn't a quid pro quo. This wasn't let me give you this money and here's what I want in response. Because that's how friendships work. If I give you a loan of $100 and say here are my terms for it, I'm not really your friend. I'm your banker. Second, this would be long term. It's a 5-year authorization and with hortatory language for another 5 years after that, which is the outer limit basically of what Congress can do. Many people in Pakistan told me, look, money's nice, but long-term is really what matters, a long-term commitment. And an underappreciated part of it is that by increasing the civilian piece, the development piece, that actually allows us to be tougher-minded with the military piece because we put strict conditions on the military side of the equation, and we also raised the possibility that we would actually be able to get tough on military aid by increasing civilian aid. In fact, it's worked out exactly that way. The administration has held up $800 million in military aid, and that has never happened before. Whether that is an effective tool or an ineffective tool, it has given the administration a tool that they did not possess beforehand. So the last piece of this is implementation, and that's where the Wilson Center's report is so important. The overall framework, as Congresswoman Harman mentioned and quite rightly pointed out, is that we cannot walk away from Pakistan. As difficult as the relationship is right now, it will be disastrous for both countries, in my view, and I think in the view of most people who look at the issue, if we were simply to toss up our hands and walk away. And by taking actions that would result in basically a rupture of the relationship. In my view, that would include placing unrealistic conditions on aid or ramping up rhetoric to the extent that this becomes a truly adversarial relationship might have the effect of severing the partnership we're trying to build. In the view of the people who crafted Kerry Lugar Berman, and I think in the view of most people who are looking at this, failure is not really an option that we can accept. Second, military aid and civilian aid are different beasts. Civilian aid is geared towards the people of Pakistan, the people we're trying to reach out to. Military aid is geared towards the military of Pakistan, and we can afford to be a little more transactional and maybe a little more tough-minded with our military aid. The fact that we have more civilian aid gives us the leverage to do that. So when we get angry at actions that occur in Pakistan, particularly from the Pakistani military, to go after civilian aid for the actions of the military would be really, at least in my view, picking exactly the wrong target. And third is if this program is going to succeed and survive, it's got to be implemented right. It has to deliver the goods to the Pakistani people, and it has to be a good use of the American taxpayers' money. That's the only way that we will maintain the support for it in Pakistan and here. And that's why the Wilson Center's report is so valuable. We need to have outside experts looking this over and making sure that the program is implemented right and also is perceived to be implemented right. So I hope that the U.S. government and the implementing agencies will take the recommendations to heart. Not because I endorse or reject them. I'm very carefully avoiding taking a position on that, but merely because we need to have outside experts making the implementation of this program as clean, effective, and powerful as it possibly can be. So thank you very much for giving me a few moments, and thank you for the work you have done.
Thank you, Jonah. Well, good morning. I'm Bob Hathaway. I have the great privilege of running the Asia program here. When I called Jonah and asked him if he would participate in the rollout of this report, he said, "Bob, how can I do that? I haven't read the report yet." And I said, "Jonah, I'm not asking you to endorse it, but I'd like for you to help set the context which has led to this report." And Jonah, you did exactly what I had hoped you would do, and thank you. Jonah sort of walked us up to the passage of what has come to be known as KLB. Let me give you a little bit more history specifically on what leads us here to come here today. In the year or so after congressional adoption of KLB, those of us who pay attention to Pakistan, and that includes every single one of you in this room, heard with greater frequency and greater urgency, particularly from Pakistanis, where's the beef? Where's the $1.5 billion you promised? And as that first year passed, we increasingly heard variations of, we haven't seen a single penny of all this money you promised us. And very quickly the narrative developed in Pakistan during the course of 2010, last year, that here's another example of where the Americans simply make fancy promises to us and then walk away. Once again, the Americans are letting us down. So it was a combination of great uneasiness over the overall tenor of the relationship between the two countries. And Jonah mentioned some of the difficulties earlier in the decade, but in many respects, partly, though only partly, because of the acceleration of the drone program, in many respects, I think 2010 was a more difficult year for the overall relationship than any of these earlier years. So the genesis of this working group reflected overall anxiety on a part of many of us about the relationship, more specific anxiety because of our perception that KLB had not gotten off to a good start, or at least the perception was in Pakistan that they weren't getting anything out of it. And then the third element of this equation was a growing suspicion here in Washington, including not simply on Capitol Hill, but including on Capitol Hill, about foreign aid in general, and Kerry Lugar Berman in particular, in the context of unresolved economic problems here, greater anxiety over the fiscal deficit, and a growing sense among the political class that we've got to make substantial cuts in government spending. So all of this was part of the context which led the Wilson Center about a year ago to begin thinking about the utility of organizing a group of outside experts to take another look at the whole aid program. So we ultimately ended up with recruiting 17 people to be on a working group. If I did anything right in this whole process, it was that I was able to persuade Polly Nyack on my immediate left to agree to chair the working group. She did an admirable job of that. She also is the principal author of the report, and once you've had a chance to look at the report, I'm pretty sure you're going to think it's a very, very solid piece of analysis, and to the extent it is, Polly deserves a great deal of the credit. And I want to acknowledge right up front my great indebtedness to Polly. Mirza Jahani, further down, was another member of our group. We have here on the front row a number of other members of the group, including Samia Altaf and S.B. Gomez Jalalian, John Sewell, Michael Kugelman, and Wilson Lee. A number of the members of our group are overseas or elsewhere, or traveling elsewhere, and so they couldn't be with us today. But one thing that's, I think, unusual about this report is that it is truly a consensus document. You won't find any dissenting views at the end of this report. It, thanks largely to Polly's diplomacy and negotiating skills, she was able to craft a document that all 17 members felt very comfortable with. It's not the same thing as saying each of the 17 agrees with every word, but it clearly is a consensus report reflecting to a wide extent the views of all 17 members of the group. The group began meeting in late January, and we met about 3 times a month into the middle of the summer. In May, a subgroup of us, including Polly and myself and a third member of the group, spent a week in Pakistan consulting some Pakistani officials, but much more often non-official Pakistanis who had views on Kerry Lugar Berman, and we clearly wanted to get a Pakistani input into this document. Coincidentally, just as Polly and I were landing in Karachi, President Obama was on television here announcing the death of Osama bin Laden. So it was an interesting moment to be landing in Pakistan. And that sort of illustrated one of the problems we had throughout this process. Events kept intruding, changing the calculus, changing our own views, changing Pakistani perceptions of the United States. Just as we were getting started, we had the Raymond Davis affair, when you'll remember how much that roiled the waters. In May, Americans discovered to their considerable dismay that bin Laden had been hiding in Pakistan for years and years, notwithstanding Pakistani statements that it could never have been possible. A bit later in the process, Pakistan decided to walk away from the IMF program, which, and this was at a rather late stage in our deliberations, but it really reopened a whole series of issues that we thought we had resolved about why should the American taxpayer provide assistance to Pakistan if the Pakistani government refuses to either live up to prior pledges or refuses to follow what are generally regarded as sound macroeconomic policies. So what business did we have to telling of the Congress or the American taxpayer that we should put money up if the Pakistanis seemed unwilling themselves to make the tough decisions? Another event, and this will be the last one, though there are a whole host of others, late in September, when Mike Mullen, who was at that point was still the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said in a very public and widely reported statement, spoke of direct links between Pakistani intelligence service and the Haqqani group, which was perhaps more than any other group responsible for the deaths of American and other NATO soldiers in Afghanistan. And once again, that raised the whole question of if even elements of the Pakistani government are working at such cross purposes with our basic strategic interests in the region, why should we support them? So it was an interesting process, and I think the fact that we ultimately ended up with a report that all 17 members of the group were able to endorse, I hope says something worthwhile about the report. Let me finally simply give you a couple of the bottom lines before turning to my colleagues to talk with somewhat more specificity about particular parts of the report. And you've heard some of this from President Harmon, though Jonah didn't know what I was going to say or what President Harmon was going to say. You also heard some of it from Jonah. But I think you can really boil down our bottom line to about 4 easy conclusions. The report argues, first of all, that as tempting as it might be, we simply cannot afford to walk away from Pakistan. For all the difficulties, we must continue to try to engage with Pakistan and to work through our many and fundamental differences with them in an effort to produce at least a modestly productive relationship. Second point, the report concludes that a robust program of U.S. civilian assistance serves important American interests. And our report, I think, is geared primarily toward an American audience. We try to be sensitive of Pakistani perceptions, and we make a number of recommendations that I would hope Pakistanis would find useful. But we were at an American audience very much in mind, and so this bottom line is that this program of economic assistance is essential in order to pursue important American interests. The third point it makes is that it warns that substantial mid-course corrections are needed if KLB is to succeed, if it's to live up to the hopes of its proponents, either in Pakistan or in the United States. And fourthly, it urges Congress, and again, you've already heard this, but it's absolutely essential in the minds of the working group. It's essential that we keep clear-cut distinctions between military assistance to the Army, other elements of the Pakistani military, the distinction between that sort of assistance and U.S. civilian or economic aid, which is designed to shore up civilian government, to begin to meet the many, many needs of the Pakistan people, and to lay the groundwork for a enduring U.S.-Pakistan relationship, not simply between one government and another, certainly not simply between this administration here and the current government in Pakistan, but a genuine partnership between two peoples. So they're the bottom lines. The report itself offers nearly 30 recommendations about how to get there from here. A number of us have spent the last 2 weeks briefing AID, the State Department, on the Hill. We'll continue other briefings around town, balance of this week and in the weeks to come. but we're delighted that you have joined us today for the formal rollout. As I said earlier, if you didn't get a copy of this, there should be copies outside the door. Please feel free not only to take one for yourself, but if you know other people who would like to have a copy, go ahead and take 2 or 3. They're free. We're delighted for you to take as many as you can use. In concluding, I simply need to acknowledge my deep thanks to the Wilson Center, to President Harmon, for the Center's support for this initiative, which, as I say, is nearly a year-long initiative. I want to especially thank my colleagues on the working group, most notably Polly, Michael Kugelman, who spent far longer on this report, more time on this report than he ever imagined he would, but 2 of my other colleagues as well. It is truly a joint effort. We had financial support. Believe it or not, this stuff doesn't happen if you don't have someone to help you. And I especially want to acknowledge the invaluable and essential report of the Fellowship Fund for Pakistan, which is a charitable group based in Pakistan, as well as ML Resources, LLC, which is a private firm here in Washington. Both of these organizations were very supportive, even as each of them probably worried whether or not they were going to be comfortable with the ultimate outcome. But to their great credit, they certainly didn't try to steer the process in any way. Lastly, I want to thank my Wilson Center colleagues in the Environmental Change and Security Program, who gave us great advice on a number of tough issues throughout this whole process, and who are co-sponsors of this event today. Now, I'd like to turn first to Polly Nyack and then to Mirza Jahani. You have their bios, so I'm not even going to bother to introduce them, other than to say that none of this could have happened without their great work and great support. Polly?
Thank you, and thank you for your gracious and excessively generous comments. But I also want to thank the Wilson Center, and you in particular, for the opportunity to work on this. This has been fascinating, at times very frustrating, and working with this working group has been fabulous. So I want to thank the working group very much, as well, of course, as Bob. I'm going to make a few comments that take us in a slightly more nitty-gritty direction. This project, from my perspective, began with the question of what, in the working group's view, should be the future of KLB. In fact, we did not start with an assumption that endorsing or even recommending ways in which to use KLB would be part of our output. For the sake of thoroughness, we actually began with the question, what if the U.S. gave no civilian assistance to Pakistan? Now, of course, when we're talking about civilian assistance, we're talking about Title I of the Kerry-Lugar-Berman Act. Title II is the security element. And as the prior speakers have all made clear, we need to make that distinction at every possible opportunity. So we started with a sort of zero assumption. What would happen if we didn't do anything on this front for Pakistan? And worked from there to another question, which is not how can we remake the system of foreign aid, which would be a very legitimate question, as many of you in the audience recognize. It would be lovely to talk at some point in the future about rewriting the acts under which foreign aid occurs and some of the layers, archaeological layers of processes under which foreign aid labors. But what we really decided that we should do is to see if we could figure out, having decided that giving aid was in the U.S. interest, not just in Pakistan's interest, not just in the interest of the relationship, but actively in the U.S. interest. How could we make the system work better? The system, the real system, not the theoretical, reformed, ideal system. And the system, of course, includes the government of Pakistan, which we very much wish were a developmental government, but it is not. The government of Pakistan is the government of Pakistan. We wish that we had a simpler, more rapid-fire, timely system for moving from a decision to give aid to distributing aid, but that's not the case. We actually have a system that's very complex and by design has a great many checks and balances. And so in the course of this, in addition to clearing up many of our own misunderstandings about how U.S. aid process, the real process, and the Pakistani end work, or have worked, we decided to use the opportunity to clear up misunderstandings that we detected among our interlocutors in Washington and among other Americans and in Pakistan. And there were a lot of misunderstandings, including the one that has been flagged particularly by Bob in his remarks, the sense that somehow or other there's been a fast one pulled by the U.S. government on Pakistan, that we've promised a lot, we claim to have been delivering it, but it hasn't come. And so even though, as Bob says, this report was primarily addressed to a U.S. audience, what we tried very much to do was to answer the questions that we encountered as we went along and clear up the misunderstandings. So we decided, as I said, that we would see how the existing system could be made to work better. But our focus was not on what is being done now, but about and with aid. What we decided we needed to do, and what our unique contribution could perhaps be, is to figure out where Pakistan might be in 5 years, what the most important trends might be in 5 to 10 years, and to begin to sketch out a proposal for how the United States, with Kerry Lugar-Berman civilian assistance in play, might be able to help Pakistan and help ourselves get out ahead of those trends in Pakistan. So a first task was to identify what will be the signal shapers of Pakistan's future. And in order to come to those answers, we tapped a huge variety of people. The U.S. policy toward Pakistan, as our discussion up to this point is certainly flagged again, has tended to look through a security lens. And what we did was we reached out well beyond that security lens. The U.S. security concerns are absolutely valid, but what we tried to do was we tried to look at non-security drivers for some of those trends. In Pakistan, we talked to sociologists and anthropologists and economists and a whole great variety of people who look at Pakistan through different lenses. And what we determined was that there's a tsunami, as we called it, of social forces that are coming into play in Pakistan on an enormous scale, and that will be changing Pakistan dramatically over the next 10 years. Think a country with sub-Saharan demographic trends and nuclear weapons, a bundle of contradictions, but most of all, a country that has already urbanized far more than official numbers would tell you for a number of different reasons, but which will be where the urbanization is going to accelerate. And a lot of it is happening not in what we would call the central cities, but in the peri-urban areas, the areas that, in the opinion of cities which have to define their beneficiaries, is just beyond their area of responsibility, a sort of demographic no man's land and municipal no man's land. So we have huge numbers of an increasingly youthful population with very high birth rate and declining death rates who are going to be crowding into cities looking for opportunities. And cities are going to be where both their hopes come together and their anger. And so very important for the U.S., if we're going to get out ahead of trends, to begin to focus on those areas. Really became quite clear when you start looking at the fundamental trends in Pakistan, not just demographic but economic as well, and you start looking at structural elements, that main Pakistan, settled Pakistan, is going to be a critical focus for any U.S. policy that succeeds in getting out beyond the present. And that Band-Aids for specific problems may not be the best way to help Pakistan get out itself ahead. That we should probably be looking at places where, when you overlay the trends that I've just referred briefly to with assistance options, it should be at the intersection of those two things that we should be really focusing our efforts. So that was another premise that we came to in the course of this. USAID is obviously pivotal to the implementation of aid, and so USAID is one element of our some of our recommended shifts in order to accommodate what we see as the need for refocusing aid and how aid is done, the extent to which the needs of beneficiaries inform what we do and how we do it more than it has in the past. But really our focus is Carrie Lugar Berman, and we certainly realize that there are many institutions that are involved in the formulation of aid decisions and even in aid delivery. One of the recommendations that may seem a little bit tangential, but really falls directly out of the analysis that this group went through and the data that it looked at, is a recommendation that we start thinking, we the U.S. start thinking as a country about stability differently. Instead of stabilization as a security problem that is primarily centered in on the periphery between Pakistan and Afghanistan, we start thinking about it more in socioeconomic, demographic terms that can sustain Pakistan in the long run, that will make for a better life and ultimately perhaps improve our relations with Pakistan. Let me perhaps add one more point and then turn remarks over to Mirza, who I'm sure will add another dimension. One of our questions when we looked at where we thought American KLB civilian assistance should focus was what would be our comparative advantage, not just in terms of U.S. capabilities for aid, but also in terms of areas that are not, that could use supplementing, areas that are not being covered by other donors. So obviously the question of the division of labor is very important to what should happen with not just our recommendations, but future aid policy in the opinion of this group. But that is a moving target. And one last comment. Let me say that some of the recommendations that we have made have already taken root independently in our policy establishment. So there is a recognition there, a growing recognition, specifically in USAID, that cities are going to be increasingly important. USAID is moving to do some of the things that we think are critically important, and we certainly encourage those moves. Like the rest of the issues that we've written about, USAID too is a moving target in a good sense. Mirza?
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this panel, and thank you for inviting me to be part of the working group, which I've enjoyed very much. I should say at the outset that although I work for the Aga Khan Development Network, the comments I'm about to make and my participation in the group was really in my own personal capacity. When I was asked to join the group, I wondered whether there would be anything further that would come out in yet another group coming together to talk and think about the difficult and challenging environment that Pakistan is. And my enjoyment of the group and enjoyment of reading this report is that it oozes out humility. It makes some recommendations, in my opinion, very humbly to say that the challenge is there ahead of us, And the way to go about addressing some of the problems that we have is to get on with the task. And I think amongst the recommendations, I hope you will find things that are immediately actionable. They don't need long-term studies or thinking. If you want to improve relationships with Pakistani counterparts, it obviously makes sense to have tour duties which are longer. If you want to get funds, if you want to get projects right directly down to the poor, work more with civil society. If you want to see change happening fast, look at the private sector and what that has to offer. And for me, those are the sorts of recommendations in the report which speak volumes for the quality of the analysis that has taken place. And I think that I would echo some of the words that Jonah was saying earlier about implementation. And the work that I've been involved in for nearly 25 years in that part of the world as well as elsewhere suggests to me that development isn't easy, and it's a process of just getting engaged with those you're trying to help, and through the ups and downs trying to make the difference that is possible. And I think that what I like about the report is the genuine desire to listen to Pakistani voices. And there was a great deal of discussion out there, and it's well represented in the report. So to the extent that this report helps to build Pakistani civil society institutions, I think we would have done a great service, not in any way minimizing the huge macro level issues that still challenge us. And I very much look forward to seeing people's reactions to the report going forward.
Good, thanks, Mirza and Polly. We want to open up to questions now, but I cannot resist making three additional points building on what my colleagues have said. Polly talked about our concern over what we have described as this coming tsunami that Pakistan is going to have to face because of demographic trends, because of migratory patterns, because of inadequate governmental capacity. And it just caught my eye this morning, which sort of illustrated that. There's a new UN study, it was just released yesterday, and Pakistan has slipped. Last year it was found in this study to be a medium human development country, but this year it has now slipped into the low human development group. According to this study, 53% of the population in Pakistan today suffers from, quote, intense deprivation. That's today. I think almost all trends going forward suggest that things are going to get even grimmer. It underscores to me the properness of some of the recommendations here. Secondly, I have to pick up on Mirza's use of the word humility. We don't believe that we can transform Pakistan. The Pakistanis have to do this for themselves. The report argues that Kerry Lugar-Berman does not give us any great leverage to force Pakistanis to do things they don't otherwise want to do. We believe that we can make a difference, even an important difference. But at the end of the day, neither KLB nor the United States is going to save Pakistan. And I think that's an element of what Mirza was talking about when he used the word humility. The last thing I'd like to say is simply to echo something that Polly has already said. We don't claim to have invented everything in this report. We have taken ideas that were already widely circulated. We have tried to provide an analytical justification for ideas that we thought were good. In fact, as Polly suggested, elements of the U.S. government, including aid and including State Department, have already moved, unprompted by this report, have already moved in the direction that we have pointed to. We can't take any credit for this because they made these decisions before this report was even finished. But it frankly encouraged me that there was a widespread recognition of some of the things that needed to be done. I think a lot of people in Washington and Pakistan find it pretty easy to dump on USAID, which, after all, is the implementing agency for much of Kerry Lugar-Burton. But I have to say that when we were in Pakistan, the thing that impressed us perhaps most is the remarkable dedication of U.S. government, including AID people in Pakistan. They have a tough job, and they are there at terrific personal sacrifice. And I, at any rate, came away from our trip earlier this year to Pakistan just, again, so thankful that we have people who are prepared to make these sacrifices in order to help other people as well as to serve U.S. interests. So, with that final threesome of comments, let's get you all into the discussion. I'll recognize you, and then if you'll wait till you get a microphone, if you'll introduce yourself. Jonah has said he's also prepared to take questions, though not necessarily about the report per se. So if you want to ask a specific person, indicate who you might want to ask a question to. Now, comments. Okay, we'll start right here in the third row. There we are.
Thank you very much. Dina Murad, Save the Children. In light of the events this past weekend, I was wondering if you could speak to the messages in the report, as well as general messaging that I think many of us are lobbying on. I think several of us have been told that it's pretty likely that aid to Pakistan is going to decrease. So just in light of that, how will messaging change, or will it change with the report that has just come out? Thank you.
General, let me sort of make a couple comments, but then why don't you give a sense of attitudes on the Hill today. We argue, and we've referenced it several times already, that analytically and for policy reasons, we have to do a far better job than we have to date. We being U.S. government, we being the American people, then we have to make the distinction between civilian aid and military aid. In a case of the fallout from events over the weekend and then the Pakistani retaliatory measures, including shutting down the supply lines into Afghanistan, closing down one of the bases that we've apparently been using, boycotting the Afghan conference next week, and probably other things as well. It simply doesn't make sense to me, and I think to all my colleagues, to cut economic assistance, which is designed to primarily benefit the Pakistani people and to sustain the principle of democratic and civilian government, to punish the people in the government for actions taken by a military over whom the people and the government themselves have virtually no control. Why do you punish one people because you're mad, one group because you're mad at a different group? That's sort of the analytical justification for where we've come down. Jonah, why don't you talk about Hill?
Yes, well, Bob has expressed perfectly what I would say in my own private capacity of the rationale for keeping civilian aid separated from political considerations. Whether that actually will be the way the U.S. government policy develops is a related question. I'm very cheered that the administration has, up till now, said that it will take that position, that so far the administration has held the line at saying civilian aid is non-transactional, development aid is non-transactional, and it has not sent up any request to cut the aid thus far. As one says for picking stocks, past performance is no guarantee of future success.
Polly?
Yes, I just want to add one line, basically, and that is, if you agree with this report, what we have argued strongly is that it is in the U.S. interest, not the interest today or tomorrow, but day after tomorrow and going forward, not to cut this aid. Now, we understand that aid writ large may be cut. We're in budgetary constraints, but Pakistan really deserves, as we've argued in here, some special consideration, not so much because of its security role as because of the looming changes that will make it a different kind of force to be reckoned with going forward.
Here, and then we'll go there.
Hi, thank you. Kate Phillips-Barrasso with the International Rescue Committee. In reference to a comment Jonah made about the Pakistan earthquake in 2005 and how we saw an uptick overnight in terms of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship because of the U.S. response, I understand we don't want to be pinning, our hopes to disaster relief, but unfortunately, Mother Nature keeps providing these opportunities to us in Pakistan, whether we like it or not. However, just looking briefly through the report and also the conversation in Washington doesn't seem to really link the two together, what U.S. strategic interests are vis-a-vis disaster relief and working with the government of Pakistan to be better prepared to respond to what unfortunately is a trend in the future, not only for Pakistan, but sort of worldwide, where vulnerable people are going to be disproportionately affected by major disasters. I just wondered for the panelists or for Jonah, in terms of these mid-course corrections, what are your thoughts about where disaster risk reduction factors into this? What are the possibilities for Kerry Lugar Berman, especially in light in the U.S. of decreasing resources and where we could have more impact in responding to human needs in Pakistan by being better prepared and investing things like that, where the U.S. also spends a lot of money on disaster relief?
Yeah. Well, first off, I feel that our disaster relief efforts, not merely in Pakistan but globally, are some of the best dollars that the U.S. government spends. First off, we have a comparative advantage versus any other country in the world in terms of just the capacity that we have to bring massive relief efforts, whether it is Chinooks, whether it is aircraft carriers, whether it is the Mercy Hospital ship. These are things that we can do that other countries cannot. And we talk a lot about friendship. We have a whole lot of rhetoric, but this is one area where we genuinely can do something rather than just issue bursts of hot air. Our response after the Asian tsunami, our response after the Pakistani earthquake, whenever we're able to really go big on disaster relief, it not only helps us morally because we're saving people's lives, but it helps us politically because we're actually living our values rather than just talking about them. Can we do better than that in Pakistan? I think we can do better than that everywhere. We had the opportunity to really match our words with our rhetoric after the terrible flooding in 2010. And we had the opportunity to have a mid-course correction of some of our aid programs so that they would go more directly to flood relief. We provided more than any other country did. We ponied up an enormous amount, over $500 million just in humanitarian relief, and at least hundreds of millions. The actual figure is under dispute beyond that in development relief. USAID contends that it genuinely reoriented its spending of KLB to focus on flood relief. I will avoid actually coming down with my own opinion on that, partly because I'm not qualified to assess some of these things. But I think in the bigger picture, can we do more? Should we do more? I think yes and yes.
Joan, I'm just back from Japan, and that's another example of where disaster relief in the immediate aftermath of the triple whammy Japan suffered on March 11th, and the earthquake and tsunami and the nuclear meltdown, has made a profound difference in the opinion of the Japanese about the United States. Mirza, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that the way in which disaster relief and preparedness connects with what we're trying to say in the report is about capacity. I mean, the evidence everywhere, and evidence in Pakistan certainly, was that the response to a disaster is very much locally led. Certainly the first response is very much locally led. And even if you look at the financial figures that I've looked at, the amounts that were given to the flood in Pakistan by Pakistanis themselves, neighbor to neighbor, community to community, far outstripped anything that came from the international community. And so what we are trying to do in this report is to generally say that building capacity and building institutions is the right way forward. And the extent to which you can create that capacity at a local level, and I think urban municipalities and urban settlements are a real case in point that the report looks at. If you can build capacity there, I think the report is humble enough to say we don't think you want to do civil service reform or decentralization, etc. But the extent to which we can create decision-making much more lower down, that would help. And what I would like to see connected in terms of disaster preparedness is capacity at the local level to do that first response themselves. And I think the extent to which local partners can be used with financing from the US to do that capacity building, that would be splendid. I don't think we've highlighted that as a specificity, but I think that the general capacity building and allowing Pakistanis to make decisions about where they want to build their capacity and how they want to go about doing it, for what purpose, is what I think this report talks about quite substantially.
I certainly agree with what my co-panelists have said about disaster relief. The reason it's not a focus in this report is that the focus of the report is Kerry Lugar Berman, and disaster relief in large part falls outside of KLB. As Mirza has just pointed out very nicely, that doesn't mean it's not highly relevant, but that's why it's not a major focus.
Here, and then we're going to go to the back of the room next.
I'm Anis Tani from the World Bank, but I'm not here representing the World Bank. I am struck by the overall thrust of the report, but there's a question in my mind. When you say you want to respond to the needs of people in Pakistan, the two most sort of articulated needs from the civilian sector are justice issues and energy crisis. And your report is silent on both of those. While you mention the others, and I'm very supportive of the way you approach, for example, the Benazir income support program, saying it's not just a matter of pouring in money, but it needs to be well designed. There need to be arrangements which would satisfy U.S. taxpayers that it is being well directed and not politicized. I think those are correct. But when at the heart of this, you need to be able to use the bill to build some things behind which people can associate with. This is something the government of Pakistan would not have done on its own. Therefore, this is a genuine assistance from a foreign friend to ourselves. And if you look at the analysis of what happened in Swat, the reason why the Swat uprising of the militants caught fire initially was because they appealed to a sense of injustice in Swat. And this is how they always come in. It then gets very rapidly transformed and distorted into something else. But there is a very strong sense that the justice sector is not delivering its goods. And you're silent on that. Thank you.
Well, we are not silent about it because we don't care. What we've tried to do is focus the report on the things that we think are, given the size of Kerry Lugar Berman relative to both the needs in Pakistan and the population, as well as the emerging trends, going to get the most bang for the rupee. So I think that's why the justice issue, which has been very important in U.S. deliberations on Pakistan, and here I am reflecting what I hear from others, and which we certainly are aware of. But we also realize it's a huge systemic issue, and one of the premises of the report is that we really can't fix the system. The report is directed to try to circumvent things that are probably high reach for U.S. donors. When the U.S. has got into the justice system in the past, what it's done quite rightly is to target very specific aspects, technical knowledge, etc. When you start getting into more political issues of choices in political culture and bureaucratic culture, you're probably beyond the reach of Carrie Lugar Berman. Now, that's not to say there are no programs directed at justice issues, but again, our focus here is primarily development. I agree with you totally about justice. But let me address the energy issue. We certainly recognize, and there's a recognition that is in this, reflected in this report that the working group had, that energy is a critical need. What we chose to do was to focus on some of the pieces of growth that Carrie Lugar Berman could realistically leverage to move Pakistan along. There's no question that Pakistan needs to make more energy, but I think many of us here who have thought about energy are well aware that there are also systemic issues, which mean that each additional kilowatt generated does not necessarily translate into a proportionate benefit. The investments are huge, and there are changes that have to be made in the management of the power sector that are a part of this as well. So, again, it's not that we don't think energy is important. There are a number of international institutions that have been involved in this for years. The U.S. is, in fact, making a contribution now, but it is probably not, in the view of this group, the place where we would have the most impact relative to the amount of money we're talking about. So what we're talking about is, again, trying to catch these points where trends and USAID capabilities and also the amount of resources that Carrie Lugar Berman has can make a difference in our view. So again, we don't disagree with you that these are really important. They're choke points, but they're choke points with a lot of different pieces. And in some ways, perhaps leveraging KLB on areas where you can see more progress more quickly in many cases was part of our thinking. We had many discussions in Pakistan and with people here about the trade-offs between doing pieces of infrastructure that you put a plaque on or not. The branding issue is very complicated, as you know. But that whole question of whether you want to leave a road, which in some cases is the right thing to do, or whether you want to encourage a part of growth that is not currently receiving credit, can't get credit to grow, the small and medium enterprises that we urge be a focus of KLB assistance in the future. That's been a big debate, but we came down where we did for the reasons I just mentioned.
Saw a hand in the very back.
Sabra Qureshi, independent consultant. Thanks, Bob, and to the whole panel for that, for those remarks. The entire panel has emphasized the important distinguishing between civilian and military aid. And as I was sitting here listening to those comments, I was reminded of my Psychology 101 class. And I just wondered, having heard so much debate, both in the media, mainstream media, alternative media, blogs, everything is just so full of it in Pakistan, about the psyche of the impacts in terms of these two different kinds of aid. So that you have the civilian aid, you have the military aid, and you are stressing the civilian part of the aid and the kind of impact it can have totally separate from the other. But in Pakistan, that distinction is not that apparent, as you may have found out from your interviews and investigations. I'm just wondering, is it possible to have that clear distinction, and how can you brand it in a way to the Pakistani people that can leave that appreciation for the civilian economic aid versus the kind of control and leverage that the military aid is bringing, and also how you can sort of distinguish the interests, the U.S. interests, from the Pakistani interests, because the Pakistanis see a lot of this coming as what is helping the U.S. achieve its objectives. Is it really helping Pakistan achieve its own objectives? What if the question was posed to the Pakistanis as to what would happen if the KLB were to be terminated? Would the perspective be
Let me
different
take
from
a first
Pakistan?
crack at that and then welcome any of my colleagues. And I'm sorry, but this is probably going to have to be the last question. We first of all recognize that money is fungible, and the last thing we want to do is provide Pakistan with assistance in certain areas, therefore taking the Pakistani government off the hook. So one of our recommendations has to do with the need for Pakistani co-investment in virtually all the projects, other than perhaps humanitarian and disaster release projects. If it's not important enough to the Pakistanis for them to put their own money into it, then it's probably not so important to the American taxpayer that we should be paying for it. So we recommend that we have for each project, or most projects, a system of co-investment where over a period of time the Pakistani percentage of money committed rises as the U.S. percentage of money diminishes, so that the Pakistanis have a ownership of these projects and of the overall program. We also think that this would be a way to better ensure that U.S. priorities are aligning with Pakistani priorities. We're not simply saying this is what we want to do for you, but instead we're saying this is what we're prepared to do if you're prepared to play your part. The last point on here I would say is we need to repeatedly remind our friends in Pakistan that U.S. aid, including civilian aid, is not an entitlement. And each project should come with a roadmap and a timetable for the United States to end up its part of the program. Again, as a way to encourage Pakistani ownership and to see or to ensure that, in fact, the priorities of the two countries are in alignment rather than simply imposing a Made in America design on something. Any of my colleagues want to add to that?
Yeah, if I could. I think it's a very important point, and that is why it is that civilian aid must not, in my view, simply be funneled through invisible organizations, even including government or even the national or provincial governments, but it's got to be visible to the Pakistani people. And that's a difference between civilian aid and military aid. If we give $1 billion in support for the Pakistani military, that doesn't actually translate to something that the Pakistani people can see as necessarily a benefit in their own lives. You know, there may be an F-16 flying above, and perhaps that will boost national pride, but that's not something that really changes people's lives. On the other hand, if there is a bridge that is built that would not exist otherwise, if there's a road, if there is a power generator, a dam, so that in Karachi you have, say, 12 hours of electricity rather than 8 hours of electricity, these are things that really affect people's lives. I've seen in other parts of the world how relatively small investments can have a big impact on people's lives and on perception of the U.S. We built a bridge in Aceh, for example, in northern Indonesia. Just a few $1 million project, but that bridge saved everyone in Banda Aceh, the capital of this province, from having to make a huge circuitous route to get to the rest of Indonesia. we could be doing this kind of thing on a much, much greater scale. And that is where the Pakistani people can actually see and feel and touch U.S. aid. If Pakistanis don't feel as if they're getting the aid, then the political impact is not there. And then if the political impact is not there, you lose the support in Pakistan and you lose the support in the U.S.
Polly?
Let me give a couple of examples that are not structures that you can put a plaque on, but are equally have equal potential in our view to let's put it this way, attract appreciation from beneficiaries, and where beneficiaries should know ultimately where it comes from. One of those I mentioned, which was small amounts of seed money credit for small and medium enterprises. There is an example where the small and medium enterprises would certainly know where their money came from. And we heard all the way across Pakistan from people who represent big industry as well as people who would like to receive such funding, and many others, that this would be one of those places where a small amount of money would have a multiplier effect on employment, on many different problems that are very real in Pakistan. That's one example where the goodwill could be engendered that has a way of trickling out beyond the immediate beneficiaries. Another that we used as an example is vocational training. There are many Pakistanis who have high school or college degrees or their equivalent, or even master's degrees, who have absolutely no saleable skills. They are unemployed. White-collar unemployment as well as blue-collar unemployment is huge. And it's not just a function of electricity. In some cases, it's a function of a dysfunctional educational system that's poorly aligned with those job opportunities that are being created. And vocational training aimed at unemployed people in urban, peri-urban areas particularly has the potential, if it's carefully meshed with local job opportunities and job creation, to make a huge difference with this bow wave of young people with high expectations and low prospects coming into urban areas. So there are a number of different ways in which, not all of them literally concrete, that we can make a difference, and where our impact in terms of goodwill doesn't require blatant public branding. It may be a little more subtle.
Mirza, the last word is yours.
I'm afraid I wasn't going to comment anything
okay.
about that, but I do think that in my work, where I do get out to rural areas of Pakistan, ordinary people see good work and accept and appreciate good work. And yes, it's most profoundly felt during a humanitarian crisis. And when those bags of wheat or blankets come with, the logo of USAID, people are appreciative. And I agree entirely with you. To the extent to which you can create that distinction between, economic aid, which is helping the people, so much the better. I do feel that overall, something that we don't talk about very much in the report, the communications aspect of international aid in many different countries needs to be strengthened.
Well, I think we're out of time. I would simply remind you that in addition to the four of us you've heard from today, we've got 5 other people down in this front row who know every bit as much and probably more about this than I at least do. And so use them as your resources as well as another 9 or 10 members of the group that couldn't be here today. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to other opportunities to continue this conversation in the future. We are adjourned.